When my mother told it to me as a little girl, she told me another story too. And this story was about a young man named Emmett Till, who was born in Chicago and had been sent down to visit relatives in the Mississippi Delta in 1955 in the Jim Crow South. Mississippi was and is in many respects still a pernicious place. And Emmett Till just did not know the rules of engagement, you know? He grew up in Chicago. He didn't know what you're talking about. Jim Crow, what? You know? Segregation, what? I got white girlfriends. What you talking about? And this is the language and the presentation that he comes to Mississippi with, you know? I can imagine this 14-year-old young man dizzy in his own ego and needing to prove to his backwoods cousins that he has a wider life. So he is constantly stepping on cultural landmines, and he doesn't even know. He doesn't know. They go into a store, a small convenience store in Money, Mississippi. And when they exit, Emmett Till whistles at a pretty white woman. And his cousin, who he was with, who I met last year, is horrified. I mean, his mortification is so high that Emmett finally sees, shit, maybe there's a problem with what I've done. And they rush home. And that pretty woman told her husband and brother what happened. And that night, her husband and brother came to Emmett Till, his uncle's house, Lowell's Right. And they knocked on the door and they took Emmett Till out of bed, threw him in the back of a pickup truck, and they drove him to a barn where they tortured him for hours. They gouged his eye out, they burned his genitals. They stabbed him, they beat him. And then they shot him in the head and threw his body in the back of that same pickup truck and drove along a dark road, pausing only to steal a cotton gin to weigh his body down. And then they threw that body into the Tallahatchie River. When it floated up and Mamie Till was called to come to Money, Mississippi to identify her son, she smelled his body 2 blocks before she got to it. She walked into the mortuary and could not identify him. I don't know if you understand how seismic that is. I didn't until I became a parent. When you become a parent, you memorize every detail of your child. Every detail. She was looking at something that she could not readily say was her son until she noticed the ring on his finger. And it bore his initials in which she knew. This poem is it's for Emmett Till. And for my own sons too. Southern trees bear a strange fruit. In this photo, he's laughing. And there is no cotton gin tied around his waist. He's not stretched into swollen limbs. His eyes are still hazel and recognizable. 2 neat white rows of perfect teeth sit totem-like in his mouth, and the world did not know him because he had not been murdered yet. He's still slipping into the kitchen to get another piece of cornbread while his mama ain't looking. He'll smash it with his fingers, drink some buttermilk, and smile with those eyes, and they are still hazel and bright, like stars in uppercase. And nobody's gouged him out or shut him closed. And when he goes to school, he'll do a silly little dance with his arms and legs cocked angles, and his classmates are gonna laugh, and there will be no cotton gin tied around his waist. Pastoral sings of the gallant sound. In this photo, he's proud of the hat on his head. You can see that by how straight his neck is, and his mama's in the picture, and they got the same face, and his head is high and perfect, and ain't no bullet in it, and it will be months before there is one, and in those months, he is his mother's child. The smug and overfed man-child all Southern ladies love to cook for, because he licks the plate clean, even if it's leftovers. He just eats and yes ma'ams and makes you giggle so much you gotta shoo him out the kitchen just so you can get the pots clean. And he's breathing and whole. There ain't no men dressed like midnight with sunless, unlaughing eyes snatching him out the door, changing everything when neither of them asked to be anything other than laughing in the kitchen with the greens still simmering in the pot. Here is a fruit for the crows to climb. This last photo is a Holocaust. It's the one that history concretized into the nighttime musings of children who hopscotched above and below Bible Belt, who saw a tattered, otherworldly version of the 14-year-old Emmett, head poised strangely on the cover of a Negro magazine. There were no eyes smiling. Mischievous man-child wonderful. Cornbread and buttermilk slicking, fast-talking, looking like his mama, straight-necked full of tomorrow's boys staring back into the camera. What was there was not there at all. What was there swallowed the world. My mama was 8 years old when they painted Emmett Till's fractured image on the cover of Jet magazine. 8 years old. Pigtails, pinafore, pleats, and a heap of pretty girl possibilities. And my grandmother set that book down on the coffee table, knowing her baby girl would see it, and then would know what should not be known, but what must be known. This is what they did with an adolescent mistake. When a fast-talking, finger-snapping Negro from up north bragged about big city white girl honeys with rosy lips and no Jim Crow, it's an image I shoved at my 14-year-old son. Frenetic in my attempt to tell him that this is Black history. I need him to know, if he's not careful, not brave, not the sum total of all our unlit courage, if he relegates these stories to cliff notes, he bleeds out and dies in the epilogue. I need you to know, Salih, my arms are never going to be wide enough to cover sins like these, that your head held so high is still a cautionary tale. But go on and do it anyway. Go on and do it anyway. And laugh and dance with your arms and legs cocked out at odd angles and slip by me and get the extra cornbread whenever you can. Be grateful that when you and your boys say something slick about the pretty blonde girl in the front row of algebra, you're permitted that. After 500 years of midnights, necks decorated in nooses, plantations that dressed up terrorism in white lace gloves and mint julep, I tell my son to remember Emmett Till. Remember that his eyes were still smiling. Remember how high he held his head to celebrate that new hat. I tell my son to remember that Emmett's mother loved him and almost could not recognize him when that last whistle left his throat. I tell my son, I'm going to be your mama all the days of my life.
that I will celebrate your brown boy buoyancy. And while I do not know what tomorrow holds, I know I will never permit you to be strange fruit. No, you'll never be broken open. No, you'll never be strung up. No, you'll never be hog-tied. No, you'll never have your face so like my own, crushed, hatcheted, mangled. I tell my son, I'm growing these limbs for you, Sally, to get around you and surround you. And we will be strong and unapologetically black for as long as we can be.